G'day guys, Aussie Bloke here. So up until now, we've been focusing on the present simple tense and how the majority of the verbs behave when trying to use that tense. So today I just wanted to focus on the pronouns and how they work in Spanish. So the pronouns in Spanish do work a little bit differently to those in English. In English, as we know, when you're describing an action or someone doing something, you really need to add the pronoun to make it clear who you're talking about. So in the simple present tense in English, for example, if we say take the verb speak, it's going to be something like they speak, we speak, I speak. You always need to clarify the pronoun to establish who exactly you're talking about. Whereas with Spanish, as we've been learning, you can just manipulate the to form of the verb to reflect who exactly is doing the action and who you're talking about. And of course, just as we have in English, there are words specifically for the pronouns in Spanish, and you can just add them onto the form of the verb that you're using. And in the simple present tense, that will generally come in front of the verb. And basically what it does is it just adds a little bit more emphasis to what you're saying, and it also clarifies exactly who you're talking about. But at the same time, you do have to be a little bit careful not to overuse the pronouns in the same sentence or just use them in a short space of time, as it can get a bit repetitive. So for example, if you were talking about a story about yourself and you had to say like the I form of the verb a lot, the word for I in Spanish is yo. So you wouldn't just say like, yo, I did this, yo, I say this, yo, I did that. It can get a little bit repetitive. Just like once is enough in the same sentence or group of ideas basically. And then you can just use the I form of the verb and it will be very obvious that you're talking about yourself. Okay, so let's get into a few examples. In this episode, we'll just be looking at the verbs that end in AR, but the rules for the pronouns apply to all of the verbs. So if we start with the verb to look in Spanish, which is mirar, M-I-R-A-R, if you wanted to say I look with an emphasis on the I, that would be yo miro, yo miro. And then if we look at the verb trabajar, which is to work, if you wanted to say I work with an emphasis on the I, it would be yo trabajo, yo trabajo. And if we now consider the verb to buy, which in Spanish is comprar, how do you think you would say I buy using the I pronoun? Yo compro, yo compro. And if we look at the verb to ask, which in Spanish is preguntar, how do you think you would say I ask? Yo pregunto, yo pregunto. So if we now focus on the pronoun for he, which in Spanish is él, and we look at the verb to look, mirar, if you wanted to say he looks using the pronoun, it would be él mira, él mira. And if we look at the verb trabajar, how would you say he works using the he pronoun? Él trabaja, él trabaja. And looking at the verb comprar, to buy, how would you say he buys? Él compra, él compra. And looking at the verb preguntar, to ask, how do you think you would say he asks? Él pregunta, él pregunta. So let's now focus on the pronoun for she, which in Spanish is ella, E-L-L-A. Just a quick side note, the double L sound is the same as the Y in Spanish. It makes the y sound. So again, ella, E-L-L-A. Just another quick side note, if you happen to be watching a series from Argentina or Uruguay, the yo sound becomes sho. So ella would be ella, which can be very confusing when you first hear it. But anyway, we'll just focus on the y sound as that's the most common one. So if we look again at the verb to look, mirar, if we wanted to say she looks, that would be ella mira, ella mira. And if we consider the verb trabajar, to work, how would you say she works? Ella trabaja. Ella trabaja. And looking at the verb comprar, to buy, how would you say she buys? Ella compra. Ella compra. And looking at the verb preguntar, to ask, how would you say she asks? Ella pregunta. Ella pregunta. Now focusing on the pronoun for they. The pronoun for they in Spanish depends on who exactly you're talking about. So if you're using the masculine they, which is going to be when you're talking about a group of all guys or a group of people you don't necessarily know who's in them, then you're going to use the masculine they, which is ellos in Spanish, E-L-L-O-S, ellos. And if you're talking about a group or two or more people and they are all women, then you're going to use the feminine version for they, which is ellas, E-L-L-A-S, ellas. So if we look at the verb to look, mirar, how would you say they look using the masculine pronoun? Ellos miran. Ellos miran. And if we look at the verb trabajar, to work, how would you say they work using the male pronoun? Ellos trabajan. Ellos trabajan. And using the same pronoun, if we look at the verb comprar, to buy, how would you say they buy? Ellos compran. Ellos compran. And looking at the verb preguntar, to ask, how would you say they ask? Ellos preguntan. Ellos preguntan. And now if we use the feminine pronoun, how would you say they look? Ellas miran. Ellas miran. And if we again look at the verb trabajar, to work, how would you think you would say they work using the feminine pronoun? Ellas trabajan. Ellas trabajan. And looking at the verb to buy, comprar, how would you say they buy? Ellas compran. Ellas compran. And looking at the verb preguntar, to ask, how would you say they ask using the feminine pronoun? Ellas preguntan. Ellas preguntan. And now focusing on the pronoun for you, which in Spanish is tú. Well, that's the most commonly used one in Argentina, Uruguay, and a few other places. They will use vos, V-O-S, for you, but we'll just stick with using the tú for now, as that's the most commonly used one. So, for example, if we look at the verb mirar, to look, if you wanted to say you look, that becomes tú miras. Tú miras. And looking at the verb to work, trabajar, how do you think you would say you work using the you pronoun? Tú trabajas. Tú trabajas. And to looking at the verb comprar, to buy, how would you say you buy? Tú compras. Tú compras. And looking at the verb preguntar, to ask, how would you say you ask? Tú preguntas. Tú preguntas. So now focusing on the pronoun for we, that behaves in a pretty similar way to the pronoun for they, in that it depends who exactly you're talking about will determine which pronoun you use. So if you're a male and you're talking about a group of all males or a mixed group, then you'll use the masculine version of we, which is nosotros. Or if you're a female and you're talking about we, a collective group or two or more females, you'll use the feminine version of we, which is nosotras. N-O-S-O-T-R-A-S. Nosotras. So if we look at the verb mirar, to look, if you wanted to say we look using the masculine pronoun, that would be nosotros miramos. Nosotros miramos. And if we look at the verb trabajar, to work, how do you think you would say we work using the male pronoun? Nosotros trabajamos. Nosotros trabajamos. And if we switch to the feminine version of the pronoun and we wanted to say we buy, how do you think you would say that? Nosotras compramos. Nosotras compramos. And again, using that same pronoun and focusing on the verb preguntar, to ask, how would you say we ask? Nosotras preguntamos. Nosotras preguntamos. Okay, guys, it seems like a good place to leave it. Hope that all made sense, and we'll see you on the next one.